So this is the eclipses of October and November 2022. If you followed my work for a while, we do this every 6 months because eclipses are some of the major events and sometimes even the major turning points for the year. And they always affect certain signs. And they're not good or bad, but they can create major shifts in our lives and sometimes herald the beginning of a new chapter, the start of a marriage, the birth of a child, the change in a career. So these are these major points in the astrology of the year. Oops. Again, this is the eclipses of October and November 2022. As I record this, this is October 22nd, 2022. So in a few days from when I'm recording this, we're going to have a solar eclipse, but we are already in the energies of the eclipses. For those that don't know who I am, my name is Katie Sweetman. I'm a consulting astrologer. A consulting astrologer means that I do work with clients, and I saw some familiar faces when we were starting the webinar, and some of you are my clients, but I do work one-on-one with people. And I also, of course, write horoscopes, I write content, I do these webinars. And I'm also a psychic medium, and that part doesn't always come through in my writings, but that's a huge part of what I do and how my work as a medium helps inform the sort of the one-on-one work that I do with my clients. And for those that don't know, I'm in the New York City area. I'm actually just right outside Manhattan and New Jersey, and I created Empowering Astrology in 2010. I created it because I wanted a space for my own voice. And at the time, and astrology, actually, the astrology world has shifted a lot in the last 12 years. I wanted there to be a space for the way that I saw astrology. And at the time, it didn't feel like we were having these types of conversations. And ultimately, the type of work that I do, even though this is a webinar and it's about the eclipses, but at the crux of what I do is for people to use astrology as a tool for transformation, growth, self-awareness, and ultimately to be better humans in the world. So let's talk about our agenda for today. This is mostly for those who just want a kind of a structural overview of how we're doing this. Of course, it's going to be introduction, the sun and the moon, divine alchemy. The sun and the moon, they are two of the most important planets. I realize the moon's not a planet, it's satellites, and the sun is not a planet. It's something that we as a planet go around. But in astrology, the sun and the moon are a planet, and they're two of the most important planets in astrology. What are eclipses? I mean, it's a pretty basic question, but it's an important question that we all be on the same page about. The lunar nodes, eclipses happen because of the lunar nodes. We'll get into that, of course. Intersecting arcs of time. Astrology is about time, our relationship with time, how we measure time. And of course, what's going on with these eclipses in October and November 2022. And more importantly, what does this mean for you? Oops. So let's do our introduction. Of course, I have to let some people in. So eclipses open a doorway. And what does this mean? About every 6 months. I say about every 6 months because sometimes the astrology is really precise. Something on or around that. I'm just going to ask everybody, if you've just joined the call, to make sure you turn off your video and turn off your mic, just because we're recording. There we go. So eclipses, they open a doorway. So about every 6 months or so, we have eclipses. Usually they're two, they're a pair, but they open a doorway. Things come in and out of our life. They are very powerful and from an energetic standpoint. And it's very common. In fact, if you go back and you look at your life, especially around certain key eclipses, things come in and out of your life. Time bends up, time bends and speeds up. And that's the thing I think we always have to understand about astrology, is that astrology, it measures time, our relationship with time, sort of how time unfolds, the quality of time, this idea of archetypical or metaphorical time. And it just seems like around the eclipses, time speeds up. Things are happening more rapidly and quickly. And I say bend because around the time of the eclipses, we're turning a corner in the astrology of the year. And there's this sort of interstitial point between the end of one eclipse chapter, which is a 6 month period, and the beginning of a new one. And here we are, on October 22nd. As I record this, we're in that sort of bendy, liminal, interstitial point between, something's ending and something's beginning. Fortunes rise and fall, and sometimes people get a little bit nervous about eclipses, and eclipses have a reputation. They have a reputation for a reason. All you have to do is look out in the world right now and see what's going on with people in positions of power. People are stepping into positions of power. People are leaving positions of power. You will see this very commonly around the eclipses, sometimes exactly around the eclipses. See what's happening in Britain right now, for example. And then there will also be these key points throughout the year where the energy comes in and out, which we'll talk about in a moment. As I said a few moments ago, eclipses, they happen every 6 months. It's a really basic point that we all just, need to sort of get into us, because every 6 months life turns. It's a new chapter. Eclipses, they push along the story of life, but the eclipses that are happening right now, they're part of a deeper story of transformation. This is a story that's been, for example, going on since November of 2021. And honestly, since there's points in 2018, 2019, there's points in 2013, 2014, points in 2003, 2004. I could go back, and that's, there's this idea of time as a spiral. And it's really amazing and creepy at the same time when you start to see the threads line up. One of the examples that I use in astrology to talk about the eclipses is that this is idea of a stage. And if we look at eclipses as the end of one act and the beginning of another, then maybe it seems a little less, let's say, anxiety prone. You're watching a performance, and then what happens? You get to the end of the act, and there's that sense of movement and anticipation. The curtain comes down. You have a sense that there's movement behind the scenes. The next set, the next stage is readying. People are coming in and off of stage. Curtain comes up, and maybe it's a profoundly new set piece. Maybe the characters that have been with you over the past couple of acts are not there anymore. There's new people. Where am I? How did I get here? So that's what eclipses do. They bring things, they bring out, the curtain comes down and the curtain comes up, and sometimes dramatically so. And that's the thing about eclipses. They have a reputation for a reason, and they can portend these sudden shifts in events. So something that you hear me talk about in my work is that the astrology is 50%. You are the other 50%. But there are these moments in time, and the eclipses are one of them, where it's not that we lose agency and power, but it's the 50% that's not us is definitely driving the story. And how do we work with eclipses? We can make decisions to end something and start something. That part is on us. But when we end something and begin something on an eclipse, it's typically final. Here's an example. Although I didn't consciously do this, I moved on an eclipse. I moved right after a solar eclipse in Gemini. And I realized after I'd signed the papers and I made the decision, I was like, oh, shoot, I'm doing this on in eclipse energies. And that means that I'm probably never going to go back to Brooklyn, where I had been for 16 and a half years. So the things we do around eclipses are really powerful. The decisions that we make are really powerful. They can be major turning points, but it's important to remember that there are forces that are greater than us. And if you've ever been through something involving weather or the ocean, or that there are forces that are greater than our ego. I had a bad accident in an ocean once, and that taught me that the ocean is way more powerful than me. And they are vortices of energy. And that's something that I say over and over again in my work, is that astrology is energy. The energy of time, how we live time, how time and this energy passes through our lives, what it opens up, what it closes. And this time around the eclipses, it's really honestly intense. And we're only a few days away from a solar eclipse. So I'm pretty certain that you all are feeling this already in your own ways. The sun and the moon, if you think about it, what's a solar eclipse? The moon passes in front of the sun. And if it's a total solar eclipse, you can't see the sun except for the corona. The sun passes in front of the moon. We can still see the moon, but it turns red. And so there's something on a sort of a deep symbolic level where those two energies, those twin forces of life, Father Sun, Mother Moon, yang, light, yin, reflection, are momentarily cut. And so that's where that sense of ending and beginning and change in direction happens. Depending on what sign you are or what rising sign you are, that eclipse is going to activate a certain part, a particular part of your life. Depending on where, this is a story that in its own may feel like really like a part of now, like, oh my God, I didn't see this coming, just for example. But honestly, it's been there. It's been there probably for a few months, probably for 6 months, probably even for 12 months. And that's the thing about eclipses, that we've been seeing foreshadowing and hints of it as the sun and the moon and different planets have hit particular points around the eclipse degrees. This even goes back years too. And for me, and I'm sure for all of you, that's why you're here today, it's knowing where the eclipses are showing up will give you a sense of what's shifting and what's shifting for this year. So if you took my Astrology of 2022 webinar, I'm going to do one for 2023 in December. But if you took that webinar, I always will go to the eclipses. I'll go to Saturn, for example. I'll go to other major things. But the eclipses will say, okay, where is the major story this year? So at the end, when we go through each of the 12 signs, you're like, oh, right. Because that's the thing about these eclipses. They're part of a story that we've already been in. And so at this point, you're like, oh, this story again, but it's a different quality of time. It's a different quality of the story. And maybe because of certain things that are being activated with this eclipse, maybe it's the part of the story where things get a little interesting, for example.